So what I would like to do in this video is to explore the meaning of love through the lens of the pardon of Hunter Biden. So in doing this, I want to be very clear that I'm not wanting to get into the political or legal aspects of the pardon because there are other sources, podcasts that people can use and listen to get that information. But when it comes to this pardon, it reveals a lot of people's understanding of what they think love is. So let me kind of explain why. So when Biden pardoned his son, he gave two explanations for why he did so. First was because of he's a father and he loves Hunter and he cares for him and is concerned about him and doesn't like the way he's being treated and so forth. The other one was because he said that Hunter Biden was persecuted, targeted by his Justice Department, and was charged for a crime that most people don't get charged for. So I really want to focus on that first thing because what is interesting there is that, well, I guess you look at it and you say, well, okay, true, you love your son, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to pardon him because you love him, right? Because he's your son. And what was strange is that I was listening to some conservative pundits, commentators, analyze this issue, and they discussed the legal and political implications. But then they also kind of agreed on, or they at least were sympathetic to Biden's explanation that he did it, or one of the explanations is that he did it because he loved his son. And that was really shocking to me because just because you love someone doesn't mean that you withhold the consequences from them. Now, and this is the shock because you think that with these conservative commentators they would recognize that, but a lot of them said, "Oh yeah, I understand. I'm a parent too, and if my kid was in that situation, I would do the same thing. However, there are all these implications." And what the real thing is, and what I was shocked I didn't hear is anyone saying, well, just because he is your child doesn't mean that, or any kid who is potentially could be pardoned for crimes, just because they're your child doesn't necessarily mean that you get to pardon them, and that's okay. And what this reveals is that people have a very distorted understanding of what it means to love. And I can tell you that I hate to say this because I would never be in Biden's position because Biden is utterly corrupt and I would never be corrupt. But let's say that I was a president and my son was committing the tax evasion and the drug gun crime issue and I had a chance to pardon. I wouldn't do it. I would say, I love you, son, but you made some mistakes here and you broke the law and you have to experience the consequences. And what's actually interesting here is, as I talk about this, I'm reminded of Matthew 5, where Jesus talks about, first reconcile yourself with your neighbor. If there's an issue at law, he says first, reconcile yourself with your neighbor. Otherwise, you'll have to, face the punishment, and you cannot be getting out of jail or prison until you've paid the uttermost farthing. I'm paraphrasing, but what Jesus Christ is saying there is if you're in the wrong and you have committed a wrong, and he's saying first try to remedy that with your neighbor. First try to see if you can fix it. And if you don't do that, and there's a judgment against you, then it is required and obligated you, according to the law of justice, that you stay in jail because typically there were debtor prisons, right? And I think likely Jesus is referring to people who are in debt and there's some issue. And he's saying to the person who's in debt, if you're in debt and you don't first reconcile yourself with your neighbor and you face a judgment, then it is just, and you must stay in jail until you have paid it fully. So Jesus Christ is advocating a very different conception than we think. We think that Jesus is all about mercy, but he's not. He's also about justice. And he says in that Sermon on the Mount, that if you're wrong and you violate the law and you don't try to make amends before, and you get a judgment against you, then you owe it to pay everything. Now, there are some nuances to that, because I think sometimes in the law today there are extremely high verdicts, and there are some complications with that. But when I bring that up is this idea that just because someone is your son or just because someone is your child doesn't mean that you spare them from the consequences of their actions. If they committed a wrong, you don't. You don't pardon them. And conservative people and anyone else should agree with that. Say, yeah, it doesn't matter if he's your son. It doesn't matter the love you have for him, which is probably really not love. It's more political maneuvering, or it's maybe you just don't want to, go through the pain of seeing your son in prison. But that's too bad. So it's not that, and instead you're not showing love, and you're just doing it for your own sake. And that is the concerning point with this whole idea, because love really is about benefiting the other person. We show love to someone else by doing things that will benefit them and help them out. And we show lack of love when we don't do that. So when we withhold the consequences, when we say, okay, I'm going to pardon my son because he did this because I love him, we're actually not showing him love, because we're not teaching him the consequences of his actions. We're not saying, well, yeah, you did stupid things, and, well, there's a law and you broke that, and so you should face the consequence. Now, there are some exceptions, obviously. I mean, if, I had a kind of similar situation. I was a president and my son, and he was prosecuted, but, it was more lawfare type thing, where the evidence was, not clear, disputable, debatable. There was, a lot of controversy. There was a lot of machinations going on. Yeah, maybe out of the interest of justice, but that's not the case here. And so what I'm getting out of this video is just, this is an example, because not only did Biden make that point, but it seems that other people were sympathetic to this idea that, oh, well, yeah, Biden's showing love because he's his son, rather than taking the position of, no, the son, regardless of whether he was a son, he broke the law, and he needs to, and it was clear, it was clear as day that he broke the law. It was basically admitted to in his memoir and so forth. So it's not like this was a more questionable case, or cases, because I think he also pled guilty to tax evasion stuff as well. And so, instead of saying that, he broke the law, we went to this whole sympathetic thing of well, he's a son, and that just doesn't, that's not what love is. Love is something that is done for the benefit of someone else. And so we should reflect that in our lives. Basically, this video is just kind of asking us, take this example and think about it. And do we do the same thing? Do we withhold punishment from children that are deserving of punishment because of how it will make us feel, because we'll feel bad, or we're scared of how they'll view us, or maybe we're just lazy? Because if we're doing those things, and we're really not showing love, because the way you show love is to instruct and teach. And the one way you can instruct and teach is through punishment. Really, truly, discipline is a very instructive form of correction and teaching, because when you discipline a child, you give them the boundaries and they learn from it. Or, no, it doesn't like discipline. Just correcting. How often if a kid's doing something wrong, do you go up and say, "Hey, this is not the way you should do it. You should do it this way." When it comes to a lot of things like cleaning or schoolwork, I mean, I guess schoolwork is maybe obvious with the grades, but interacting with people, like if you see your kid interacting in a way that is better, do you say it or do you just kind of let it go on? Because if you really love them, you'd want to give them a little bit of truth to then improve themselves. Because the more truth you have, the less you suffer. And so this is the whole kind of issue with people, how they portray Christ. They just say, "Oh, he's so loving," but they don't realize that like this is the same Christ that commanded Saul to kill the Amalekites, commanded the Israelites to, um, you know, wipe the pagan nations off. They commanded Moses to kill the wicked Israelites who were worshiping the golden calf. I mean, it's love in the Savior is not this a simple, limp wristed, "Oh, I forgive you" mercy type thing. It's focus on benefit. And you can see it clearly. The Lord, that's what he did. He taught things. He was not liked for it. He was hated for it, but he still did it. Now, of course, there are there's wisdom. You don't just go and share everything you know at one point to someone because they might not fully receive it. I think Ammon's a good example. Is you teach a lot of times by example, but if there's an opportunity to teach, you do it. And further, if there is a punishment that is deserved, you don't spare your child from that punishment. You let them experience the consequences of their actions so they can learn. That's the whole point, right? Again, we have the bitter. We come to prize. We're here on earth to learn to prize the good by tasting the bitter, right? By learning from our mistakes, and then by doing so, we grow from it. And so, just closing this video is just kind of, it's interesting that even in politics we kind of see this and among a lot of even conservative people. You'd think that would be a little bit more law and order. They were sympathetic, and it just shows you that there's a gross distortion of what it means to love. And let's not fall into that trap, because our job is to benefit people. That's what Christ does. That's what the Lord does. Everything he does is for the benefit. And sometimes what is beneficial might not seem that way. It might seem harsh, but it actually can be the benefit because it can teach the child. It can train them to avoid the mistakes and learn from those.